Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about the refineries that have been attacked so far by Ukrainian drones. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that there's been a sea change in terms of the war in Ukraine. Up until the start of 2024, Ukraine was very much on the defensive. It was on the back foot. Russia has a huge amount of firepower and personnel and financial backing in terms of all of the effort that it's putting into the war. And Ukraine is obviously dependent upon aid from other countries. And in the second half of 2023, Russia was definitely on the front foot. It was making more gains and Ukraine was very much under pressure. However, in 2024, things have changed because Ukraine has been focusing its effort on trying to get technology companies in Ukraine to focus on ways that they can attack Russia to come back and cause major problems for the Russian economy. And one of the most successful that they've developed so far is the production of drones that are loaded with explosives that can fly for hundreds of miles, potentially up to 1,000 miles over Russian territory. And these drones can be piloted using the same sort of technology that's used in gaming. And that means that the Ukrainian forces are now able to hit things like oil refineries. And over the past 6 weeks, there have been hundreds of Ukrainian drones that have targeted Russian oil refineries. And it's reported now that the refineries have lost 11% of their capacity as a result of the strikes that have taken place so far. However, in today's video, I want to go through some of the details to look at those refineries and talk about what the potential is from Ukraine's point of view if they were able to take those refineries down and cause them to shut down for a prolonged period of time. So in today's video, I'll take a detailed look at the refineries that have been attacked so far. We'll look at the damage that's been inflicted upon them, what their operating capacity is, and what the impact of taking out those refineries would be on the Russian economy. We'll then talk about what the impact of all of these strikes has been so far in terms of oil prices, both globally and within Russia, because oil prices are now going up as a result of global nervousness as to what might happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. We'll then talk about what Russia's response to these attacks has been so far. They've now come out and said that they're planning to install military at all of these refineries. So we'll look at what they've said and how much that's likely to cost Russia in terms of deploying equipment that they are currently planning to use in Ukraine back onto Russian soil. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think the implications of this change in tactics by Ukraine has on the Russian economy and what's likely to happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, thank you so much for the time and effort that you've taken to do that. I really appreciate it. And if you've signed up as a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or YouTube memberships or Buy Me a Coffee memberships, thank you so much for that long-term support. It really helps me to post more videos. And one other way that you can support the channel and also have a little bit of fun is by entering the raffle that I've set up to win this guy, Stiltman. Now this is an amazing piece. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that I've been showing this piece for about 3 years and you can win it. So check out the video at the end of today's video. On the 21st of January 2024, the Ukraine war changed forever when Ukraine sent its first weaponized drone to attack a Russian oil refinery located on Russian soil. And the reason that this changed the face of the war is that it put Russia on the defensive for the first time since it invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. And one of the reasons that Ukraine is doing this is obviously to hit Russia where it hurts, in its pocket, because Russia is spending a huge amount of its revenue on funding the war in Ukraine. And one of the only ways that Russia will come around the table and talk about some sort of peace settlement is if it starts to lose capital and it can't afford to keep the war going. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll be fully aware that the Russian economy is entirely dependent on oil and gas, and predominantly oil. That's what's funding both the economy and also the war in Ukraine. So if Ukraine could come up with some amazing way to stop all of that revenue coming through, then that would potentially bring some sort of deal to the table. And that's exactly what they're doing with these drone attacks. This map shows some of Russia's major oil refineries and provides details of those that have been attacked so far. Now, in terms of determining exactly what's going on this map, the dots represent the location of the oil refineries, and the circles that surround those dots indicates the percentage of Russia's total refinery output that refinery relates to. So basically what that means is that the bigger the circle, the bigger the percentage output. And the circles that have been coloured in relate to those refineries that have been attacked by Ukrainian drones. And we've got a colour coding here. The red circles indicate the refineries where the operations have been disrupted, so they've either had to close down or reduce their capacity. The yellow circles relate to refineries that have now had their operations restored, so that were previously disrupted but are now back online. The blue circles relate to those refineries that were not damaged during the drone attacks, and the circles that don't have any colour in them obviously haven't been attacked at all yet. And what this shows is that in the period between the first attack on the 21st of January and the 17th of March, 11 oil refineries have been attacked. 7 of those refineries reported damage that affected their production, and of those, 4 of them are still disrupted in terms of the damage that's been inflicted. And I think what's really interesting when you look at the map is the geographic range of all of the different refineries that have come under attack. Ukraine has been spreading those attacks. It isn't focusing on one particular region, which obviously would make it slightly easier for Russia to be able to defend. Ukraine is actually looking to attack all of the refineries that are within striking distance. So basically, Russia doesn't know where the next attack is going to come into, and it's making it very difficult for Russia to come up with a plan to try to defend all of these facilities. And if you look at the range, it's getting longer. The most recent strikes were almost 1,000 miles, and Ukraine is constantly developing its technology to be able to carry these drones further. So when you look at this map, there is a potential that all of these refineries could come within range at some point over the next 3 to 6 months as Ukraine continues to develop long-range weaponry. And the second and really important point to note about this map is that Ukraine is also targeting the terminals. So if you look at the Black Sea section at the bottom of the map, which is close to Crimea, which was annexed in 2014, Ukraine has targeted 2 refineries that are on the Black Sea coast. And the reason that that's important is that Ukraine has the potential to now attack the terminals that are located there. So this is where the ships are coming in and loading up with fuel. So if Ukraine wants to change its focus and not just focus on refineries, but also target the port, that could have a really damaging impact on Russia's exports, because if it's no longer able to actually load up all of the ships, then that's going to have a huge impact on its revenue. And if you look right at the top of the map, you can see that Ukraine has been targeting the port near St. Petersburg as well, which serves the Baltic Sea. So Ukraine has successfully targeted 2 export routes that Russia is using to export its fuels. And if those routes were closed down, that would have a devastating impact on the Russian economy. This list provides the details of all of the refineries that Ukraine have targeted so far as part of their drone attacks. And the reason I wanted to focus in on this is really to talk about the percentage of Russia's oil processing capacity that these refineries account for. So let's quickly run through the details of these refineries and the reported attacks that have taken place so far. The Slavyansk refinery was attacked on the 17th of March and has a production capacity of 80,000 barrels of oil per day. Now, in terms of what percentage that makes up of Russia's total processing, the figures that we're looking at are for December 2023, when this refinery was actually undergoing maintenance. But 80,000 barrels would equate to around 1% of Russia's total processing. And as you can see, in terms of the damage that was inflicted by the drone strike, a fire broke out at the facility. However, no details have been provided by Russia as to the extent of that fire or what damage it actually caused in terms of operating the facility. The Kubyshev facility was attacked on the 16th of March and has a capacity of 141,000 barrels of oil per day, which equates to 2% of Russia's total processing capacity. Now, unfortunately, we don't know the extent of the damage caused by the recent drone attack because Russia is now trying to keep this information under wraps. Workers at the facility and the local governors have been told not to release this information because it doesn't want it getting back to Ukraine. The Novokubyshev facility was also attacked on the 16th of March and has a capacity of 167,000 barrels of oil per day, which again equates to around 2% of Russia's total capacity. And it was reported by Russia that the attempted drone strike was thwarted on the facility, so it was unsuccessful. The Cizran facility was the third refinery attacked on the 16th of March and has a capacity of 171,000 barrels per day, which equates to around 2%. And it was reported in the Russian newspaper Kommersant that the facility had to be closed down as a result of the drone strike. The Pervy Zavod facility was attacked on the 15th of March and has a relatively small capacity, only 24,000 barrels per day, and it was reported that no serious damage was inflicted by the attempted drone strikes. The Ryazan facility was attacked on the 13th of March and so far is the largest refinery with 343,000 barrels per day, representing 5% of Russia's total production capability. And it's reported that as a result of the drone strikes, 2 of the processing units on the site had to be closed down. The Novoshakhtinsk facility was also attacked on the 13th of March and has a capacity of 112,000 barrels, which equates to around 2%, and is now operating at lower rates as a result of the attack. So basically, some of the facilities have been damaged and can no longer be used. The Kurishi refinery is the largest of all of the facilities that Ukraine has targeted so far, with an operating capacity of 422,000 barrels per day. And attacks were undertaken on the 12th and the 13th of March. But from Ukraine's point of view, these were unfortunately unsuccessful and the facility is operating normally. The Norsy refinery is the second largest that's been successfully attacked, with a capacity of 341,000 barrels, and it was attacked on the 12th of March, which resulted in an emergency halt of one of its processing units. The Ifipsky refinery was attacked on the 9th of February and has a capacity of 131,000 barrels per day, representing around 2%, and is reported to be operating normally after the attacks. The Ilsky refinery, which has a similar capacity, was also attacked on February the 9th and did have to close briefly, but is now operating as normal after restoring all of the problems. The Volgograd refinery was attacked on February the 3rd and is the 4th largest that's been successfully hit so far and is now operating at reduced rates following the drone attacks. The Yanos refinery has a capacity of 301,000 barrels per day, which represented around 6% of Russia's refining capability in December, and it's reported that this site is now operating as normal following the attacks. The Tuapse refinery was the second attack that was sent by Ukraine on the 25th of January and has a capacity of 241,000 barrels per day, representing around 2% of Russia's total capacity, and has been reported to be offline ever since those initial attacks took place. And the very first drone attacks took place on January the 21st against the Ust-Luga refinery, which has a capacity of 157,000 barrels per day, representing around 3% of December's total production capacity. And it's been reported that that facility had to close down for several weeks, but has now been restored back to normal operating capacity. So these are all of the refineries that Ukraine has successfully targeted so far. And the reason I wanted to show this chart is really to take account of the percentage of Russia's processing that these facilities account for. Because if you add up all of the figures here, it equates to 45% of Russia's total processing capacity. So if Ukraine was able to successfully achieve drone strikes against all of these facilities, which is not impossible because obviously they are now in range because they have drones that have already attacked these sites, that means that if they were able to shut these facilities down, Russia would lose almost half of its processing capability. And that would mean that it would have to cut its exports by at least 50%, if not more, because if Russia wants to divert some of the gasoline and diesel to its home markets, it may actually ban all exports. And the impact of that on the Russian economy would be astronomical. That would potentially bring an immediate peace settlement because Russia wouldn't be able to survive if it lost more than half of its export revenue. This chart shows the movement in the price of Brent crude oil over the last 6 months. And the reason that I'm showing Brent crude oil here is that it's a good benchmark of oil prices globally. And if we look at the price on January the 19th, which was the last trading day before Ukraine commenced its attacks on Russian oil and gas facilities using drones, you can see that a price of a barrel of Brent crude oil was sitting at around $77. If you look at the price today, it's now sitting at above $86. And one of the main drivers for that increase in oil prices has been the commencement of Ukrainian attacks against Russian oil, as the oil markets are now concerned that there will be disruption to Russian oil production and therefore Russian oil exports and therefore global oil supplies. Because even though the West is no longer buying oil from Russia, they're still a very important part of the global supply chain. They're selling obviously large quantities to India and China. And if India and China can't buy it from Russia, they will obviously need to buy it from somewhere else because there is demand. And therefore, when we see an increase in demand and potentially disruption to supply, if supply goes down, then you get an increase in price. And what happens with oil prices is that they're always looking down the road. They're always trying to work out what's going on with demand and supply, whether or not there's going to be too much oil or not enough oil. And at the moment, the markets are concerned that if Russia's oil supply is disrupted, there won't be enough oil, and therefore prices have started moving back up again. And obviously from the global economy's point of view, that's relatively bad news, because at the moment, we've got inflation coming down in most of the big economies around the world. 12 months ago, we had high levels of inflation. A lot of central banks have been trying to bring that down by increasing interest rates to discourage both individuals and companies from taking on more debt and spending more. And as a result of that, we've seen inflation starting to come back down. But oil is a major factor in terms of global prices. Firstly, it's included in the basket of goods. But secondly, the price of oil feeds into the price of a lot of other things, because a lot of goods have to be transported, and therefore you have to include transport costs. And that means that oil feeds into that, because most vehicles are using oil or some sort of derivative of oil, but also the chemicals in oil are used as a raw material for lots of different industries. So oil has a big influence on global prices. So when the price of oil is rising, it tends to push inflation up. And that's obviously bad news from a lot of central banks' point of view, because they're trying to bring inflation back down. This chart shows the movement in the price of Urals crude oil, which is the main crude oil being produced by Russia over the last 12 months. And as you can see here, the price of Urals oil has also increased significantly over the last couple of months. On January the 19th, just before Ukraine commenced its drone attacks, a barrel of Urals oil was trading for around $63. Today, it's trading for closer to $79, which you may think is good news from Russia's point of view. The price of their oil has gone up, so therefore they should be making more money. But if you think about what's going on right now, the problem that Russia has is that their capacity has gone down. So whilst the price has gone up, the volume of oil that they're selling is actually reducing, which means that they're getting less income. It's estimated that as a result of the attacks that have taken place so far, Russia has lost around 900,000 barrels of oil per day. So if you do a simple calculation of 900,000 barrels of oil times $79, that equates to around $71 million per day of lost revenue. However, the situation is actually worse than that, because the refined products sell for a lot more than the crude oil price. They sell for somewhere between $100 and $150 per barrel, depending on what grade of refined product we're talking about. So the 900,000 barrels per day capacity that Russia has lost equates to somewhere between $90 and $135 million per day of lost revenue, which on an annualized basis equates to somewhere between $32 and $50 billion of revenue that Russia is losing as a result of the reduction in capacity. So whilst the price of a barrel of oil is going up, if your volume is falling, that's bad news for the Russian economy. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video really to provide a roundup as to what's been happening in terms of all of the drone strikes against Russian oil and gas facilities over the last 6 weeks or so. I've reported a number of videos individually talking about what happened on each of those days, but I wanted to take a step back and look at what the overall impact is. And as we've seen from today's video, the impact so far is absolutely huge. The attacks that have been targeted against Russian oil and gas facilities equate to around 45% of Russia's total refining capacity. Now, obviously, not all of those facilities have been completely wiped out. They're not closed down. The strikes so far have only damaged certain parts of those facilities. So we've got partial closures. So we're not talking about 45% of Russia's total output yet. But the fact that Ukraine have all of these facilities within their range, they can now target all of these refineries on an ongoing basis. Ukraine can now build more drones that potentially can carry more explosives and cause more damage. And from Russia's point of view, that is an absolute nightmare because in terms of defending all of these facilities, it's going to be very difficult. Now, Russia recently came out and said that they're intending to deploy Pantsir missile systems at all of their oil and gas facilities. So basically, these are military vehicles that have missile systems on the back of them that can be used to try to shoot down those drones. But the problem with that from Russia's point of view is multiple. Firstly, they need to find all of those different Pantsir trucks, and at the moment, they're all being used in Ukraine. They don't have a large supply sitting around in Moscow doing nothing. They're all on site. So they'll have to take them out of Ukraine to move them to all of their facilities. And Russia has around 44 mega refineries, so at least they will need 44 of these. The second issue is the cost of those Pantsirs, because they cost around $15 million each. Now, that's just to actually supply them. You then have to put missiles into them. And from Ukraine's point of view, their drones are relatively low cost. They're only costing a few $1,000s. But the missiles that will be used to try to shoot them down will cost around 50 times that. So they're very expensive. And unless you hit it first time, there is a possibility that Russia could be sending hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of missiles to try to blow up something that may only have cost $3,000 or $4,000 to make. So from an economic point of view, Ukraine obviously has the upper hand. It will be drawing lots of firepower out of Russia that will be costing lots of money. It's also moving all of that weaponry outside of Ukraine. So it's helping Ukraine on the ground in terms of the day-to-day battle that's going on in Ukraine itself. But also, it's difficult to shoot these drones down. So even if you did have a missile launcher system, you need to have it ready at all times because you've no idea when these drones are going to strike. It could be day or night, and it could be anywhere. So this is going to be very costly from Russia's point of view. And there's obviously no guarantee of success because they're currently trying to shoot these drones down and they're not managing to do it with every single one of them. The Russians are obviously having some success, but some of these drones are getting through, and it's likely that that will continue. And as we talked about earlier in the video, as Ukraine continues to develop its technology, these drones will get smarter and possibly have longer ranges and be even more difficult to hit. So from Russia's point of view, it's difficult to defend against. And the damage that's been caused so far is estimated to have taken out around 900,000 barrels per day capacity. And as we talked about, on an annualized basis, that's going to have an impact of somewhere between $30 and $50 billion on the Russian economy. If those facilities remain affected for the next 12 months, that's how much income Russia is going to lose. But this isn't the end. This is actually the start of the process. Ukraine have only really got started. They've only been doing this for around 6 weeks. And as they get more funding and more support, they're going to build more drones. And therefore, it's likely that they're going to be bombarding all of these facilities over the next 3 to 6 months, which is a nightmare from Russia's point of view. And as we also talked about earlier in today's video, they also have the opportunity of hitting the ports. If Ukraine decide that they want to send drones to the ports themselves to try to damage the infrastructure where Russia is actually loading up all of these ships with its oil, that could have a huge impact on the Russian economy, because even if the processing plants can produce the oil, if you don't have any way of actually loading it onto ships, then you can't export it, and therefore you can't convert that into cash. So this is an absolute nightmare from Russia's point of view. And as we talked about right at the start of today's video, the change in tactics from Ukraine is quite smart because they're losing on the ground in the battles against Russia in Ukraine. But what they're doing now is striking back with economic warfare, hitting Russia where it hurts, in its pocket, trying to stop all of the oil and gas exports so that Russia doesn't get that money, so it can't keep funding the war. So the overall summary of today's video is that since the 21st of January, Ukraine has changed its tactics and started targeting Russian oil and gas facilities. So far, they've sent drones to 15 oil refineries in Russia and had strikes on 9 of them, which have caused partial closures. But over the next 3 to 6 months, it's likely that we will see a rapid increase in the volume of drones being sent. It's likely that we will see more strikes and more closures, and that the impact on Russia's production capacity will grow over the next 3 to 6 months. That's going to reduce Russia's income further, and therefore will put further pressure on the Russian economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face. I've got some really exciting news for you. I've decided to give away another one of my statues, and this time it's this guy, the man on stilts. Now, if you've been watching my channel, you'll know that this is one of the original pieces that I've been showing in the background for the last few years. This is a truly amazing piece. I absolutely love it. And it's made by a British artist called Paul Moggetts, and he makes a limited number of each one of his pieces, and I've managed to secure a second one of these. But I'm giving this one away, which is the original one that I've had in the background for the last few years. And if you'd like to win it, you just need to buy a ticket in the raffle, which are priced at £1 each, which is around $1.30. So very affordable. So if you'd like to support the channel, rather than buying me a coffee or sending me a YouTube super thanks, why don't you buy a ticket in the raffle and you could have this in your home some point soon. Now, in terms of organising this, I've got an independent company to collect the cash and make the draw for me. So I won't be choosing it. It will be entirely at random. And I will post this anywhere in the world to whoever wins it. There is a possibility that you may need to pay a little bit of import duty depending on where you live and what the rules are. But I will send this anywhere. So if you'd like to win it, please buy a ticket in the raffle and good luck.